right, Ryan.
Welcome, Michael.
Here we are, brother.
So number 4.
Yeah, number 4 on the list. Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about something that's, well, been deeply transformational for us both, realistically.
Yeah, we are. It's changed our lives.
Oh.
It brought us together.
100%. Yeah. We wouldn't be us without it.
No, exactly. Well, we wouldn't have found us.
For sure. I'm sure we would have got there.
Yeah.
But it would have been a longer journey, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're wondering what we're talking about breathwork.
Breathwork.
Ultimately, rebirthing breathwork. And Ryan and I, we met. Obviously, we've spoken about how we met, but we travelled a 9-month journey to learn the art and the process of rebirth breathwork. And it was the most miraculous time of our lives, I would say, among many others that have come since. But
sure.
that was definitely the portal.
100%. And I think it's, for me personally, I think it's so powerful because it's exogenous. Like, it's something that comes from within you. You're not taking plant medicines or psilocybin or ayahuasca. You're literally using something that we all have inside of us. It's an innate ability and intelligence that we all have inside of us to just release the past and to embrace the abundance of the now.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's nothing light about rebirthing breathwork. It's the true shadow work. As you just said, there's no other influence to put us into a different state. It is us creating that state, creating the courage to move into our own shadow, into our own shit within our subconscious.
Sure.
And that takes, I'm going to say it again, absolute courage. Every one of our clients that turns up, absolutely fucking turns up.
Yeah. And if you don't, there's always a shying away. Something that we always talk about in rebirthing is willingness. You know, if there's a willingness to change, if there's a willingness to let go, if there's a willingness to breathe, then there's a willingness to move through. All right, you can work if someone is willing to change but don't know how to. But if there isn't that willingness, as soon as they approach the doorway to move through an experience, the past trauma, past hurt, a subconscious limiting belief, if there's no willingness, essentially they're just going to step away. They're not going to allow themselves and their body and their breath to move through it.
Yeah, and that's ultimately how they will be showing up in life. You know, they'll be avoiding, based off the past traumas and programs that are stuck within their body.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing, it's not really their fault that they don't have willingness. No. Maybe the trauma for them personally at this point in time just seems too big to actually let go. Because a lot of us actually identify with these past experiences, these past traumas, like who are we without it? And that's ultimately one of the most scary and intimidating things or aspects of the work for us to move through is that, man, who am I actually without this trauma? Who am I actually without these subconscious limiting beliefs? Yeah,
and just that true deep identification levels you can't see, it's who you think you are, and I mean, we've rebirthed hundreds and hundreds of people and ourselves, and the miraculous changes in just one session every single time still humble me, still humble, and they always will, because especially if someone turns up who has never experienced anything outside of kind of the matrix existence, I guess.
Sure. Pills, cognitive behavioral therapy, other forms of talk therapy. If you're just guided through this experience where someone's just going to spend half an hour with you talking about things that have been going on in your life and what's present, and then getting you to lay down and simply just breathe in this very simple pattern, and it's going to help you shift through trauma in a way that you never could have thought possible. There's a reason to be skeptical.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there might be some people sitting there going, "Oh, what the fuck are these guys on about? Just breathing." I mean, how many times have you said to someone, "Oh, you're a breathwork facilitator," and they go, "What? I know how to breathe.
I know how to breathe. I've been breathing since birth."
I thought the same thing before my breathwork experience. I know how to breathe. Yeah. But this is thousands of years old. Thousands of years old. I mean, rebirthing in particular is one of only a couple of westernized breathwork creations, but it's still based off an Eastern philosophy.
Sure. It was actually a gift from the East, realistically.
It was.
So when you have a look at the history of rebirthing, essentially there was a guy by the name of Leonard Orr, and he was just sitting in his bathtub one day thinking about how we can support clients in a deeper way to move through some of their own past experiences. And as he was laying in the bathtub, he had this overwhelming feeling to start breathing in this specific way. All right, they call it conscious connected breathing. Essentially, it's just a certain breath pattern where there's no gap between the inhale and the exhale. We breathe through our mouth, we breathe deep into our chest, and essentially through this breathing experience, he relived some of his most traumatic experiences from when he was just a child, and it actually took him back to birth and the birth experience.
Well, that is the most traumatic thing anyone will ever go through, is their own birth. There's a reason why we don't remember it.
100%. You're this tiny little thing, you're living in the warmth of your mother's stomach, there's no sound, there's no light, and then you essentially get ripped out into this world. For a lot of people, unwanted.
Yep.
For a lot of people, they can be like forceps, literally pulled out into the world. There can be a lot of trauma for the mother as well. There can be the use of different drugs to just try and numb them. So essentially they're coming into the world sedated. They could be C-sections, so they don't actually birth through the actual portal or canal. So there's no real passage. And through breath work, it can actually take us back to that experience.
Yeah, help us move through it. I mean, excuse me, everything is held in our body. Just because we don't remember it consciously in our mind doesn't mean it's not somewhere. We still experienced it. We experienced being in the womb. We experienced that. On a little side note, it's so beautiful to see the kind of shift in birth work as well from that. Especially you look at beautiful Rosie, like how deep in that, and then just seeing the network of how a birth experience naturally can be, and I mean, we've seen it all the time with our clients, and how traumatic birth experiences stay within the body, how a mother's environment will create and switch on particular genomes or genes within the body. And that's what's creating your personality, which is your personal reality, whilst you're in utero, and we hold on to all of that, all through our life. If you got pulled out forcibly,
you're forced into the world.
You're forced into the world.
So for the rest, for an extended period of life, if your body stays stuck in that trauma of being pulled into the world, then essentially you're going to be pulled around for the rest of your life. You're going to allow yourself to be pulled around because that's actually what feels most comfortable for you. You actually didn't make one of the most important decisions of your life, and that was to be born.
Yeah, and that's, imagine the courage. That needs to, you're in the space, you haven't been given any programs, any identities, any labels. You are just a conscious being in the human body, and so you are the universe right then and there, but then all of a sudden, the mother's body is so innate, starts to, the water breaks, and then you're like, whoa, what's going on here?
Different flood of hormones.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that, and it's like starting to kind of press you out, and then where you got to go? Well, you got to go down this canal that you can't fit down, so your head actually gets squeezed and it gets pushed through, and you've got to be pushed through this canal, and come out, and then take your first breath, and it's so powerful to have truly understood that through the Rebirthing Breathwork kind of process, and seeing that in people.
Well, and seeing the importance of the things that we do through breath, and how much of an experience it should be, the way in which it should be honoured. The way in which birth is experienced for a majority of people, although it's not their choice, it's the way things have been set up. Realistically, it's not set up for an enhanced experience of the mother or an enhanced experience of the baby. Essentially, it's set up so that doctors can get through as many births as possible, and that the position that the mother's actually even put in, with her legs up, spread eagle, open wide, is actually just so that the doctor doesn't have to lean over, so that he's in a position to actually cradle and catch the baby as it's coming out.
Yep, absolutely. It's massive. Like I don't like. I remember my daughter's birth. She's 7 now, and I was in my state of being at that point, and had I was just run of the mill kind of the medical practice is the way to do it, and that's what's been taught, and it's fine. And I think back to Bella's birth, and as soon as she came out, boom, they gave me the cord, it snapped it, and I remember it was still pulsing, it squirted at me. There's that true just instant disconnection from everything that you know and feel and love, and the pain that would come with that as well.
Yeah, literally one of your first experience on the planet would be pain.
Yeah.
And your first breath isn't natural. If we wait for the umbilical cord to fully stop bleeding, for the blood to stop pumping all the way through, the baby will naturally start to breathe. But if it's snipped, then your first breath is just going to be a gasp because you're literally like, what the fuck, where am I?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was you think about the different generations, how they used to pull them out, hang upside down, slap them. If you truly think about it, those are our very first experiences of this human existence.
Sure.
What is that? When we see it, what it does to people when we lay them down and we rebirth them. It's incredible, and it all starts from there. It all starts from conception, really.
A lot of our programming can start from there in conception, and then obviously our upbringing with our mothers and fathers.
Yeah. There's I'm not sure who said it, so I can't quote them unfortunately, but it was something I read or watched, and it was in the space of epigenetics, and it was there's been this paradigm that there's an angry gene or a criminal gene, selfish gene, all these genes. I understand, yes, the ancestral lineage is passed on through that and all that sort of stuff, but ultimately what they were saying was that especially the angry young man, if you're listening, I'm doing air quotes here, the angry young man, that goes through the rampage and is always fighting and can't be calmed and settled. Well, what they were saying is, let's put it back to creating a safe environment for the mother whilst they are not, in the pregnant process, because ultimately the mother is perceiving the world, and your thoughts are her thoughts, and there's no shift in those. You don't know what are hers and yours. You are getting programmed based off how your mother perceives the world. If she's in an unsafe environment and she's afraid and her fight or flight response is on, well, what genes are they going to switch on within you?
Yeah, for
They're
sure.
going to switch on the world's an unsafe place, so you need to fight to stay alive. And wow, that's going to make you pretty fucking angry, isn't it, coming out? Because you got to come out swinging, really, because your mother is perceiving. So what they were going into is that just within one generation, if we could just create safe environments for pregnant women to be safe, be seen, be loved, be nurtured, and be caressed and go through a natural birth process, that just in one generation we could actually eliminate about 60 to 70% of all this perceived anger and criminality genes and all that sort of things like that. Obviously there are deeper ancestral kind of wounds that need to be worked on, but I really...
I believe it.
100% through our work.
So going through the process and experiencing my own birth, I'd believe that, very much so. And experiencing what the experience was like in the womb, 100%, I believe that. Yeah,
and imagine how it would perceive just to give the mothers love, allow them to be a mother, let's give them some safe environments, and so that was quite profound when I either read or watched that, and I thought, and it really related back to how many rebirths we've done with people and just the common themes that come up.
Yeah, for sure. So essentially going back to a little bit of the history of rebirthing. So as Leonard Orr went through this experience, he came out of it and was like, man, my God, that was one of the most profound experiences of my life. So he essentially started to work with this core group of 10 other facilitators, teaching them the process, starting to understand it deeper, starting to build out what rebirthing was, how birth and our experiences in vitro shape and change who we are, our personalities. And then a few years later, he was actually in India, and he was going to an ashram of a saintly man over there called Babaji. They call him the immortal man. They think he's about 700 years old. And he went into this ashram, and he was just looking around, walking around, and actually some of the devotees came up to him and was like, Babaji wants to speak to you. And like, this is unheard of, because
and obviously Babaji's not there. He's, in spirit.
No, he's there.
He was there.
He's there. Yeah, he's lived multiple lives in this one life. We've seen him as a 90-year-old man, an 18-year-old boy,
Yep.
and essentially he just chooses a physical state for a period of time, and then will shift his soul into other states. So that's essentially how he is immortal. Not so much physical immortality. He hasn't lived in one body his entire life, but he changes these states. And so he got pulled to the side. He went up to him, and the first thing that Babaji said to him was, "How did you like the breath?" And he goes, "I've given the West this breath because you don't have the time to sit in meditation. You don't have the time to take 10 days and do Vipassanas. You don't have the time to work through all this trauma. And this breath is a way for us to shift through it and move through it extremely quickly."
Beautiful, yeah. And a little side note, he was actually a very high up pastor in the church as well.
Yeah.
So he was in the whole religious aspect of that, Christianity, Anglican religion.
Yeah.
And from there he obviously went away and
trained a few different people,
yeah.
10 core people, and then essentially it branched off, and now there's all these different forms of breath work, whether it's holotropic, whether it's clarity breathing. I think there's a new one, biodynamic breath work. All of these different modalities essentially came from this original form of breathing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll give the listeners a bit of an overview of how it's done, or how we got taught it.
Yeah.
So what it is, it's lying on the ground, it's connective conscious breathing through the mouth, out through the mouth, into the top of the lungs. So ultimately, when we are going through an experience or a trauma or something like that, we are breathing in the top of our lungs. It's the sympathetic nervous system that is fired up, and so what we are doing is we're re-triggering that sympathetic nervous system to go deeper into the body, to be able to allow these stored emotions, these stored energies to open up really, and to go through them, because obviously in our body, in our psyche, when we go through something and we don't want to face it, or we're not taught how to feel or really sit with it and just kind of move on, it will get stored in the body, and then it becomes an avoidance, becomes it's a controlling driver of our being, of our from our subconscious, because our brain doesn't want to deal with it. Our ego is very good at keeping us safe. It's ultimately amazing at its job.
It's what its job is.
Absolutely.
The brain has one job, and that's to keep us alive, keep us safe.
Yeah, and it does very, very good. So these harder things that we haven't moved through are stuck and stored in our body. Well, that's ultimately what this breath does. And so, we'll get the client or the person to lie down, and they go through that breath for up to an hour. And it's profound.
Yeah, deeply profound, and you can actually see the shifts through the body as the person is breathing. You'll see different parts of their body lock up. You might see their hips start to get really tight. They might have something called techne, which is also normally very, very common. You might see their jaw starting to lock up, and this is just all places in the body where we have stored and suppressed trauma.
Yeah, and because everybody stores it differently in different places, and so whilst we're doing a rebirth session with someone, we'll go around and then we just intuitively feel where to kind of press on different parts of the body, and it'll help somatically kind of release that or open it up for them to be able to experience that in a safe way. Like, everything in this is safe. It's just your choice whether you want to go through it or not, or continue to hold it within yourself.
Yeah, and that's something that, because we're using we're using the breath to be able to stimulate these different things. And I mean, our body is so intelligent that it's never going to show us something that we're not ready to move through. And some people might be like, wow, that was probably too big for me to comprehend. But the power of this breath and the power of this work is that when we can actually move through it, it means we actually release it from the body. Yeah. It's not like when we're just doing cognitive behavioral theory where we have to bring up all of this past shit and it just carries on circulating. No, through the breath and through the somatic movement, through the release, all right, that trauma, that experience, that emotion just dissipates from the body.
Yeah, it's one of our great quotes, right? The only way out is through. And so, and talk therapy all has its place, and we're certainly never here to dampen any work on any sort, but what that kind of does, it pulls you back into the memory of what you know. Well, when there's something in there that you don't know, you can't tap into it in a conscious level. You've got to go into an altered state of consciousness through the breath or through other means, but this obviously we're talking about breath, to go in to be able to truly feel and release that emotional edge that is holding within your body. That's ultimately what triggers us in life. When you have an adverse reaction to something, well, that's just the divine remembrance within the body of that thing reminds me of a thing that happened. It's totally unsafe, and I'm going to get you to yell at it, or I'm going to get you to fawn at it, or I'm going to get you to run from it, And so once we go through this process, you become a lot more responsive rather than reactive, because you choose. It's raising your consciousness level, because ultimately when you pull it out of when you go through your shadow, you put your light onto it, and then what you've done is you've actually now created a conscious memory of it, but you have the power to allow it to not control you anymore, because you have it in your consciousness. And so you can be like, okay, cool, I'm not going to react to this as much as I did. And over time, then that becomes part of your personality. You're rejigging your personality. You are creating who you want to be. You are seeing who you are. And it's just so profound.
Yeah, it is really, really profound. And I suppose one of the questions we always get from people, especially after their first experience, because they sort of come out of it and they're like, how the hell did that even happen? And it works on, there's many different, I suppose, theories around why it happens and what's happening in the body. All right, one of them, as Mike said, through this breathing, because we're breathing into our chest, because we're breathing open mouth, we're over oxygenizing the body. All right, we're flooding the body with all these stress hormones, and when we're actually breathing in this way, it activates our limbic brain. So our limbic brain is where we store all of our emotions, predominantly something called the amygdala. And because we're breathing in this specific way, we overactivate the amygdala, and it has this opportunity to release past experiences, or to show us or shed light on experiences that we might be just running as subconscious programs. So as we're moving through this experience, as your body's getting really, really tight, a memory might just pop into your mind about something traumatic that happened to you. And when we're talking about traumas, we're not always talking about these big, huge traumas that we have. It might just be one time when your dad said something to you. It might just be one time when someone told you that you weren't enough, and your body just locked onto that, remembered that experience.
It's not always my uncle touched me up in the back, backyard, and that's it. This is why, we don't relatively use trauma word a lot. Obviously here we are just to explain it, but it's all very relative. Sure. Just because your trauma, because you didn't get picked for a team you really wanted to when you were 7, is still just as relative as somebody getting touched in the back, because the repression is still the same. The feeling of unsafety and unworthiness and unwantedness, ultimately, yes, the latter is much more traumatic in the physical sense, and there's a lot more repression of something like that, and then that obviously culminates in the body through dis-ease and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's obviously on a relative scale, and how many times we have people sit in front of us and go, well, I've had a great life, I had a great childhood. It's like, well, cool, I'm not here to dispute that, but there's always stuff. There's always stuff, and why you are like you are right now is because of what you went through. Let's just go and let's just have a crack. Yeah,
for sure, and it's very, very true. I mean, I remember through the rebirthing process that something that dropped in for me, and one of my biggest traumas that actually held me back from cultivating a positive relationship with my dad, was when my uncle said to me once, "You're going to be just like your father." And because of the past experiences that I've had with my dad, in that moment I made a conscious choice of I will never be like my father. And that actually forced us to have a relationship that was never fully connected, because I had this subconscious program running in my background that I never wanted to be like him.
Yeah, I remember doing my father wound, and it was very similar to that. But what the paradox of that is that you become what you deny.
Yeah,
you know.
sure.
So then you look at yourself, you're like, I am exactly
like my father,
and they are the things that I mostly dislike about myself because of the things that I never wanted to be. And then from there becomes separation,
sure.
and then there's conditional love because you only love the parts of the self that you like,
100%.
and it's just allowing that all to flow. So it's it's very similar.
Very, very similar. So, well, let's just talk a little bit about our own experiences, or I suppose re-experiences of birth. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll touch on. So I remember my first. So this was in the core training that we did. Firstly, shout out to our teachers, David and Pauline.
Absolutely amazing. Love
you guys. It's our spiritual mum and dad. And just their no-nonsense approach to life. I love it. So their course is called the Human Evolution Mastery. And so obviously within this course, the first time that I actually got proper rebirth and I was coming out, so I actually firstly became my mum giving birth to me. And I could feel just her pain and all of that was in me, because obviously at that point, she's passing on the pain, it was in me. I became my mum rebirthing, and then I then got rebirthed from that, so I came back to my birth. I came out of the vagina, out of the canal, and I remember taking my first breath and I was just shaking. I just was absolutely lunatically shaking, and it was just like gasping. I was the brand new baby, I was there, and it was a very profound, and I'll say profound a lot today, but it's such a it's such a term,
it's a good word.
To describe what it is. To actually be there. I'm not sure who was rebirthing me, but anyways, and then I just got cradled. I just got cradled by my rebirther and just held, and I just wept tears. I just cried tears, because there was just so much pain and agony and all of that was in my body, and then there was another experience that I went back even further. So it was our first hot water rebirth. So that's done in a spa pool. So you do the breath work in the spa with your facilitator. You're submerged in the water. It's about 37 degrees, 37 to 40, so it's blood temperature or just above. So it signifies you being back in the womb, and you got a snorkel and a nose clip on, and you're in there, and you do the full hours breath work in the water. And that takes you right back to the womb and move through whatever you need to move through there. Now, I remember the first time we did our training, actually you were rebirthing me, and I went back further. I became my dad's sperm entering my mum's egg, and it was, I became the sperm. I was there. I like, even talking about it now, I have the memory of the vision of the actual image in my mind of it happening, and as David and Pauline would say, that the further you go back, the higher your consciousness raises. And that's the power of, that's just our own breath, with all the set, the intention, the pre-work leading up to that, and I just came out of that just alive, because that's the first time you've truly won something. That's the first time you've truly experienced that
victory.
Yeah, that's it, victory. And if we can keep going back to that, then nothing else is mattered, because it's like you won. You are here. You are here. You chose to be here. And yeah, so those kind of first times I went back there. I've gone back there a few times, many times since, to the birth process, and obviously being physically rebirthed, and pushed through,
and it's quite funny because, funny, I use that word lightly, I suppose. It's interesting when you're working with a client and you see when their body is going to a point of rebirth. Now, obviously, you can't understand what they're going through and what I suppose, scripts and stories and movies playing in front of their head, but the body gives some really intelligent clues. You know, maybe they'll start placing their hands on their head and putting lots of pressure, or they start pushing their feet forward like they're actually trying to push themselves out.
Or they'll bring their knees up to their chest.
Bring their knees up to their chest, yeah.
And so ultimately what we will do as a facilitator is, you know, if we're working together, then both of us will go. But if you're just doing it singly, you know, we'll put our hands on their head, and we will, you know, cup our hands, and we'll tell them to push, and it signifies them actually pushing back through and taking them back through, and then what we'll do is we usually tell them, you've got to choose life. You've got to choose life.
It's your choice this time.
It's your choice this time to be here. You know, I haven't seen anyone not do it yet.
Yeah.
There have been some times where people have really, you know, we just keep working. You choose. And then from there they'll push, and then we'll make it tough for them, and then they'll push, and then they get through, and then we slide our hands kind of down past their ears as they're pushing through, and then we push on their shoulders, and when you get to their shoulders, it's like,
feel it lock up.
Yeah, they lock up, and they start kind of waving around like a fish out of water, you know. And then we'll push their shoulders, and then we push them through, and then they're just out. They are literally like a fresh newborn baby, and they're gasping and they're taking breaths.
Yeah, and the body, you see the body always relaxes after. It goes from this really tight, tense state of needing to push, and then they'll just like...
Yeah, they'll take their first breath of their own choosing, you know, and there's so much power in that. You know, there's definitely so much power in that. So yeah, so those are just a couple of my own personal experiences of the actual rebirth process. Obviously, sometimes when we are rebirthing like that, if you're the facilitator, it's not necessarily they've gone back to the actual, you know, birth.
Yeah, rebirthing from an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. They're choosing to actually physically push through themselves through that experience for them to actually go, I choose to move through this, and so that's obviously the symbolism of that as well.
Yeah, very much so. So for me personally, my birth was extremely traumatic. For both me and my mother. These are conversations that we sort of had throughout the experience of going through the 9-month journey. And before we actually went into the warm water, we actually were guided through something called the conception process. So the weeks leading on, we were told to have conversations with our mother about what birth was like for them, what birth was like for us, when the umbilical cord was clipped, whether or not we were placed on their chest straight away, what complications were there. And through that experience, before the experience, no, we didn't actually talk about it. This was something that came up throughout the experience, and then we talked about it afterwards. Because even for her, as we were talking about the actual birth process, you could sort of tell that she was shutting down, and she was like, I don't really remember much, simply because it was traumatic for her. Same for me, the rebirth for me happened in the warm water. So goggle on, nose clip on, you're laying down, you're breathing, and I could just feel myself being in the womb, and I could feel that I didn't want to come, I didn't want to be born, I didn't want to actually, it's like I had done this before, and the time before was so challenging, there was so much persecution that I didn't want to have to do it again. And so as I was breathing, it was actually just before I actually came through the womb, because my mother told me that throughout the experience, it was like a 12-hour labor. I got caught in her hip bone. The midwife actually had to put her hand up inside of the womb to actually detach me so that I could come out. And so through this experience, I was feeling all of these different pressures. I was feeling this pain on my head. I was feeling like I was being forced into something that I didn't want to do. And throughout that experience, I actually chose to wrap the umbilical cord around my throat and essentially try to kill myself. And what this was actually showing up through in the birth experience, like in the now, as we're in the thing, was I literally started to choke myself.
Yeah,
I literally started to choke myself. And I was still breathing, like forcing myself, not wanting to come through. And then essentially it was like me being pulled out into this world. And so it was really, really difficult. It was really, really challenging. There was a lot of emotion around that, because it actually wasn't a want to be here. And you could see how that story translated through a lot of my life. That idea of not truly showing up, not wanting to be here, always finding the challenges in life and not seeing it for the beauty that it actually is. So essentially I came back through, I rebirthed, there was this, I guess, deep reverence afterwards of the experience. I laid back, I literally just wept and cried all about it. And then that night I went home and had another conversation with my mum, and I asked her, I said, was the umbilical cord around my throat when I was born? And she was like, yeah, the umbilical cord was around your throat when you were born. And she said that when the midwife, because they were actually about to fly her to a bigger hospital, because I was small and born
country boy,
and they were literally about 10 minutes away from flying her to a bigger hospital, and essentially inducing her, giving her a C-section, where the midwife went up there, essentially pulled me out, and the midwife said it was like I was grabbing on. It was like I didn't want to come, literally latching onto her hip bone, and then coming through the experience.
Yeah. Imagine if you got C-section, you would just be numb.
Oh, you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't even know you're in the world.
No, it's but yeah, it's so powerful to understand these things, because then it's understanding yourself.
Yeah.
But then it's also the openness, right? And this is a lot of the this is the depth of inner work. You do it for yourself, but it helps others around you. That conversation with your mum would be very healing.
Oh,
because it's such deep questions to ask about such a deep thing. I remember when I asked my mum about, hey, look, what was my birth like? You know, and she said, oh, it was just normal. I said, what's normal? You know, you know, it was by standards a drawn out, laboured process. You know, no real complications or anything like that. I was born fairly well. You know, I wasn't, you know, not wanting to come out in the world or anything like that. But this is where, when we do our own work, we heal the others around us, because it's these deeper, open conversations that you start, and then it allows people to kind of drop into like, oh, okay, well, I haven't wanted to think about this my whole life. It's like, well, let's go there, you know, because you now have the ability to go there, you know, because it's not something that is controlling you at a deeper state that you don't know.
Oh, 100%. And after that experience, I was able to show up in life so much more powerfully and so much more as me, because I had that experience. I'd known where it had come from, and essentially that trauma had been released from the body, you know, and I was able to have that conversation with my mum about it and essentially apologize. I said, hey, look, I'm sorry for making birth so traumatic for you. And then we just had this beautiful embrace.
Yeah, and this is where, you know, it comes down to everything's our choice. You know, even at that stage of life, you know, we still choose, you know. I think let's go a little bit deeper here on your actual in utero, in the womb. So you had a profound experience with actually our teacher Pauline, where she picked up on that you actually had a twin in the womb, and you ultimately killed that twin whilst you were with your twin.
For sure. So how did that trigger? So essentially it was actually after the course. I was guiding people through rebirthing experiences, and it was like, and there's many, I mean, they call it rebirth because to experience a rebirth first you actually have to experience an ego death. And what was happening was clients were getting to this point of an ego death, and there was just a fear that would come over me, and I didn't know why. I'd worked through all this stuff, I learned all the different tools and techniques and practices around it, and I didn't know where this fear was coming from. So after this happened twice, I went back to my teacher Pauline and said, hey, look, there's something stopping me from guiding people through the death. And she was essentially just like, well, that's extremely dangerous, because if you pull people out of that state, then there's you haven't allowed them to fully cycle through.
And as a side note, Ryan did push them through. He was just feeling the fear. For sure, 100%. It was just recognizing that it was there. We weren't doing anything unsafe.
No, definitely not, because that was just my own ego trying to take control of an experience, right? And we had a conversation for a little bit. She laid me down. I literally took like 3 breaths, and she just said to me, you were a twin. And as soon as she said that, my whole body just ached. There was just this deep sadness and longing and pain, and I just burst into tears and was then taken back into the womb, where it was me and my twin essentially, and it was a choice. It was a choice of who was going to survive. who was actually going to be born into this world, because we consciously realized that my mother wasn't going to be able to look after us both, or make it through the pregnancy with us both.
Or her thoughts are guiding you in that way.
For sure.
That could have been her thoughts going, well, what am I going to do with two twins?
Yeah, very much so. And the other twin essentially chose to die. So one of the experiences that I had to live with in the womb, just ruminating on for months and months and months, was this death. So there was a fear of taking other people to death, because I'd taken my unborn twin to death as well.
And holding all the shame and regret and all of that around.
100%, and it actually came up in the last ayahuasca journey. I think I mentioned this when we were talking about it last week. But this loneliness just came over me throughout the ayahuasca journey, and I could feel it in my stomach moving up, and I purged. I looked into the bucket, and my twin was in there.
Yep.
There was an actual fetus in the bucket, and that was just I suppose the last sign of releasing that sorrow and sadness or loneliness and that longing to have someone else in my life. And then there was just pure joy and bliss,
love, baby.
And just love. It's powerful. Powerful.
So I think was it today or yesterday? No, I think it was today. I told you the realization. So I had a massive realization today about a hot water rebirth that you took me through. Probably, God, it would have been about 3 months ago, maybe longer. And so Ryan and I have a solid practice of rebirthing ourselves. Because you've got to continue on the work, because the depths that we take people, we can't have any part of ourselves they can hide in. So we've constantly got to do it. And again, it flows our life and makes it truly abundant. And when you've done enough of this stuff, there's only so much of the core wound stuff before you kind of start just, when you go in, you're hitting the stuff of the month or 2 months that you haven't done it, and kind of moving through that. But every now and then, a new fucking level unlocks. A new level that unlocks that you never knew was there. And so the realization I had today was that hot water rebirth that we did there, it unlocked a new level for me that day. And what it was a depth, a true core depth of not being wanted. Not being wanted. So what happened is I went into this deep, deep core wound of not being wanted, because I was the firstborn of my parents, and what it was that I felt at the time, I've since had conversations with my dad about it, was that the first thought of when they found out I was they were pregnant with me was, oh Jesus, oh fuck, and that was my first inception of what it was. Since I've spoken to my dad about it, I said, I just said, hey Dad, what was it like when you first, found out you're pregnant? I said, with me, and he said, no, we were happy about it, but your mum was in turmoil, just with different things going on. So, we'll do a full episode on mothers at some point from this. Hey mum, if you're watching, love you, and Dad, love you too. But
love you too, guys.
But the pain and trauma my mum's gone through her whole entire life, it made true sense for that. And so that unlocked that huge, it was a deep sadness, brother. I was in a funk for about 3 weeks after that,
For sure.
And it just opened it up and unlocked it, and I just had to feel it. And it was only a realization that it was today, that started the catalyst of my last 4 months to finally have been in my Aya ceremony on Saturday night, where it was one of the most profound identification, stripping away beer, opening everything up, and true, ownership of myself, but that was the catalyst, and it took 4 months. So you never know the depth of this work, right? But then again, it will never throw something up that you're unable to handle. So obviously, that the whole time of all of our work with this, my body was still saying, no, he's not quite there. And all of a sudden it's like, boom, opened it up. It's like, okay, he can go and basically be in a death portal for 4.5 months, fuck everything up, end relationships, go broke, you know, all of the stuff, because this is what he needs to do to go to integrate. And I'm finally just coming through the other side of that, which is beautiful. But that's the power of this work, you know. And again, that's just where we reiterate, like, it won't show you anything or won't bring up anything you aren't able to handle. Like, that was, it was time for it to happen, you know, then, and not any other time.
But a lot of people are scared and intimidated right now.
Yeah. But that's why we're here, brother. That's why we're here.
That's the depths of the work, realistically,
yeah,
right? And it took. Oh man, I mean, you would have had over 50 rebirths, probably even more, realistically, by now, probably even close to 100 for it to get to that point of just being like, okay, cool, that is the deepest core wound that I need to move through, and it's gonna take some time to process that, you know. And the beauty of it is you have the tools to integrate it, you have the tools to work through it, and the breath wouldn't have shown you that wound if you didn't have the ability to work through it.
And ultimately, I finally purged it on Saturday night in my ayahuasca ceremony, and it was a deep, deep core commitment wound. Deep. It was like so profound, you know. And I've been in that a deeper death pool the last 2.5 weeks, you know, 3 weeks.
Yeah, we spoke about it last week.
Yeah. And so, you know, I finally have just. I've got this space because I've purged it out of my stomach, of my solar plexus, of my root chakra, and where there was pain, where there was darkness, there just feels love now. You know, it just feels so. I feel so open and expressive, so fully cracked open. It was a true death in all avenues.
Yeah, well, that's the goal in this life, is to have many deaths before you physically die, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know.
And that, I mean, ultimately is the power of it. I mean, we've talked about the experience of birth and things like that, but it's the freedom that's on the other side of moving through these traumatic experiences that is actually the true power, because you stop running from these you stop running on these programs, and you actually allow yourself to show up in life as you, powerfully, energetically. You find there's just this lightness to you. There's not the same, I guess, blocks or limitations that are holding you back, and there's just like a freedom to be you, a freedom to understand, a freedom to like experience life in a new and profound way.
You know, and it really helps having amazing support network around you. You know, and when you're going through something, having that, you know, having Van, you know, having amazing people in my life, like that's truly the ability. And when everyone around you's doing the deep work, everyone's constantly shifting and evolving, you know, and so everyone's never plateauing, you know, and so it's just being held in that space to do your healing, you know, to ultimately find God, which is love. God is love, 100%. You know, the divine, you know, trust in all of that, you know, and that's what this brings. And, you know, if some people listen to this going, geez, it's deep. It's like, well, that's the depth of our human experience that is on offer. That's what's available, you know, and that's why we sing it from the rooftops, you know, and because, you know, not everybody's ready to experience it, but the people who are, I want to be able for them to be able to hear these messages and go, yeah, I'm feeling that in my body. That's something that I want to do. I'm the true motivation is sitting in pain long enough for you to make a change, you know, and it's just so many people sitting in pain, you know, and it's just like, well, let's make friends with that pain, you know, let's do something about it.
Let's acknowledge it. Let's understand why it's here, you know, and then we can actually work with it and integrate it. You know, and that's a big part of rebirthing, is actually working with the shadow, understanding the personal laws that we have, the beliefs we have about ourselves, understanding and working with something called demonstering, which is essentially identification of the shadow aspects of ourselves that we often live in shame around. And when we can actually start to bring awareness to these shadows, we can actually start to integrate them. We can start to ask ourselves or ask the questions about, like, why are you here? Why are you showing up in this situation? Essentially, what do you need for me to support you so that I can fully integrate you? You know, because a lot of it's about self-acceptance. you know, and quite often we're running from who we are because we're afraid of who we are. You know, very similar around the idea of not wanting to be like my dad. So every time that an aspect of me would show up in a similar way where I had or seen him showing up, I would create shame around it because I'd be like, no, I have this belief I don't want to be like my dad. So I'd always be running from who I actually am. But the more I've gone through this work, the more I've shed these different layers and these different perceptions, our relationship has become so much more fluid because I see him for who he is, not for who I want him to be.
And I think you can take that concept to every relationship in your life.
Very much so.
You know, and ultimately, again, it just comes down to unconditional love. Firstly, for yourself, because if you have conditions on your own love, on the parts of yourself you don't like, then you're not going to love. Well, then that's what you're going to project onto everyone else. You know, and it's the process of it is so simple, but yet it is so deep, you know, and that's kind of the oxymoron of it, right? It's like getting into a cold shower. It's like, you know, we have a workshop, you know, we have a group workshop that we run, and you know, we just getting people to just go, hey, look, finish, you know, let's start small, let's get you to finish your shower on a cold. And for some people, that's one of the most frightening experiences, because our mind creates these things that it's so much harder, and then we're a victim to it, and then we're like, cool, we'll stay away from doing something that's hard.
I wonder what their past experiences or what potential traumas they may have around cold water that brings up so much anxiety or even the thought, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's mostly just pain, the fear of pain.
Fear of pain,
you know,
fear of
pain.
discomfort.
Yeah, discomfort. Like it is discomfort. You know, we search for comfortability. You know, our society is built around comfort. You know, how everything that is sold to us is how to make our life easier. You know, it's like, well, cool, go have an easy life. We'll help you make it truly easy, because you can actually then just flow in the ebbs and flows of it, but you've got to do some hard shit to get there. And that's the brass tacks of it. You know, there's true bliss at the end of suffering. It's like, well, you've got to willingly choose to go into it. You're going to suffer anyways, so fucking choose to go into it yourself.
Yeah. And it can, like, we're not saying that you're going to have one rebirth and everything's just going to disappear and dissipate. Essentially, or an analogy that we use in rebirthing is that essentially we are a trauma tree. You know, we have all these different experiences that have happened to us, which are limbs and branches. And essentially, if we haven't worked through it, it's just become overgrown. And through every breathwork experience, it's like we're going through and plucking off a limb or an aspect of the tree and removing it. Now, that trauma may show on another branch that's connected to the main trunk, or it may show up in a different way. All right, so that's realistically the power of not just going for one and done, but actually committing to it and being like, okay, cool, I'm going to go through the process of 5 or 10 breathwork sessions and really just dig deep and just trim off as much as I can.
Yeah, well, you're not going to go to the gym once and be amazingly fit, right?
No.
And it's the same as anything. It's just like, it's consistency, it's commitment, and it's committing to it, and it's going into the hard stuff and going, well, it was hard, but checking with yourself, integrating it, and going, yeah, there are some subtle changes. And that's how you change things, people around you as well. You know, if you're in a partnership and you want to start doing the work, well, it's all for you. You know, and then they can choose whether to try and bring you down to their level. And you know, as you raise your consciousness level, you will see that happening. People will drop off, and that's a scary thing as well. But that's the part of evolution of growth. You know, it's one of the harder parts. And if you've been doing something, you know, if you're in your 40s and you've been doing the same thing your whole life, and you start doing this work, you know, it's scary how fast things happen. You know, but it's amazing. I mean, how many messages do we get from people afterwards going, hey, I have a new group of friends, I have a new partner, this and that, and it's amazing. And it's like 100%, but you did it. You know, you and I, we're just there to create safety and support in the set, but it's ultimately, you've done this, you know, and I think that's the message that gets through. Anyone that claims that they are going to do something for you, I think
it's an ego.
It's an ego, right? It's like, hey, we are just here for you to do your work, you know, and we do ours to ensure that you can do yours.
Yeah, for sure, because you're always going to go deeper when you have other people around. You know, if I guide myself through a self rebirth, it's never as deep as if you're being watched and viewed and held in that space by someone else. You know, you're always going to find places to even hide within yourself sometimes.
Yeah, of course, because it's fucking hard. You know, I don't care how many we do.
Breath
I'm doing
for a reason,
yeah.
right?
If I'm doing one by myself, you know, I'm not going to push myself as deep as being facilitated by you.
We're sorry, Pauline and David, if you're listening. Don't kick us out of the facilitator training, please.
Well, here's a note on that. So ultimately, you know, that what's really exciting is we're actually going back, and we are going to be, you know, teacher aides. We're teachers in training, so we're going
full year internship.
Yep. So we're going to be running through that, so we can come out again, and then we can create the teacher, we can be the teachers ultimately, and we can create the workshops, and we can start putting students through it as well to take this out into the world, you know, and the way that we are doing things with data and ourselves, and you know, these are the little minute kind of chinks in the growing consciousness of the world right now that it needs, you know, and you know, we're getting more and more people just showing up, especially after the lockdowns, who never would have thought to be about this work. Sure. And they're like, well, I've got to try something, and they'll turn up and they have this experience, and then
and there's always going to be, as we said at the start, there's always going to be potential healthy skepticism. You know, you might be listening to this and being like, well, this sounds like a whole
be fucking skeptic.
Yeah,
I encourage everyone. I'm a skeptic.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a skeptic of everything. You know, like if someone's given me some energy work and I'm like, okay, well, am I feeling something here or not? You know, there's every now and then there's like, okay, this person's in, but you know, I'm a massive skeptic.
No, but you should be realistically, right? And the best thing with the breath is you come in, you go through, get guided through the experience, you lay down, you breathe, and you feel it. You feel the change, you feel the difference, you feel the experience viscerally in the body. You know, it's not always about something dropping into the mind, because even that can be the ego's want, need, or desire to try to understand or control. But you feel it, you feel different, you feel the experience, you walk out of here a different person. Not because there's anything we do personally, like yes, we might say something specific or help shift an energy in the body, but ultimately it's the breath that's guiding you through the experience, and there's no hiding from it.
No, and on a physical level, you are literally waking up every single cell in your body. Every single cell in your body is standing alert. You know, there's nothing else in your life that you do for that to happen. You know, and so the actual overflow of change within the body, you will feel it. You know, even, you know, because every breathwork's different every single time with every single person, you know, and sometimes if you know, we get highly depressed or, you know, suicidal or anxious clients, and ultimately if they just lay down and they just breathe, they don't even have any releases, well then great, that's what it needed to do. They've just got an hour's worth of breath. Their nervous system is now a little bit more relaxed, a little less inflamed, and they can feel a little bit safer within themselves. And if that's all it is, then great. You know, that's the job done. That's the breath doing what it needs to do. You know, it can be anything and everything. You know.
Very much so. It can be anything and everything, and that's the thing. We don't try to go in with any preconceived ideas or notions about what should happen or what's going to happen, because that can ultimately take us away from the experience of what should happen.
Yeah, well, exactly right. So in a rebirth process, it takes 2 hours. So the first hour, obviously, we're sitting with the client, you know, in a chair just like this, and we're just prodding. You know, we're just prodding with questions. You know, we're just going, hey, tell us about this. You know, and it's just truly listening. You know, and reading the person's body, and when they start moving into something, they'll try and shift away from it, and we're just like, no, hold on, let's pull back, let's go back to that, let's drop you into that, let's allow you just to feel that a bit, you know, and from there, then it's intrinsic trust, it's safety, and the person's like, gets permission to be able to feel, you know. I think it's a really important part of the process. It's giving them permission, giving them to give themselves permission to feel, you know, to go through what they need to go through, to be witnessed. And to be supported.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very much so. It is, and it just builds that trust, relationship, safety, so that when they do go into the breath, they know that they're going to be held in reverence, and so that they can just go in through the process and ultimately be guided by their body, guided by their breath, and shift through whatever needs to be shifted through.
Yeah, very much so. So yeah, if you're all listening out there and you're interested, just give me or Ryan a head up, and we will we'll talk to you about it. We'll take you through whatever you need to take through. But it's just a conversation, it's just a conversation about breathwork, And if you've gone and tried breathwork somewhere else, great. There are literally hundreds of different types of breathwork. No one better than the other. There's just different types for different modalities. But I can tell you, there's no drum beating, there's no song singing, there's nothing. There's just you, and that's it. And that's the simplicity, but yet the power in it.
Just you and the breath.
Just you and the breath.
Beautiful, brother. Well, I suppose, it's beautiful work, man. It's beautiful work.
Well, it's our soul work, right?
Oh, 100%.
It's our soul work.
It's as I think actually what was already spoken about before is the first experiences we've had with breathwork and the profound shift that we noticed, and it's just ultimately guided us to where we are today. So without the breath, without rebirthing, I would not be who I am today. I wouldn't be as free as I am now. I wouldn't be as living in such abundance as I am now. I wouldn't be so as willing to even work with different plant medicines because of past traumas. To be ultimately allow myself to just experience all the joy, the freedom, the love, the gratitude, the peace, the harmony, the pain, all of it.
I think one thing we haven't touched on too is cold water rebirthing.
Yeah.
So that's the next evolution. That's the next step. That's we would never throw anyone into a cold water rebirth unless they rebirth with us, probably at least 6 times, and they've done a hot water as well. So cold water rebirthing is the same as the hot water rebirth. However, it's done in cold water, around 15 degrees. And so ultimately you're in the water, cold water, you've got a snorkel on, nose clip, and you do your breath work in the water. Now this is probably the most closest to the psychedelic type process that I've gone through with a rebirth. But this is ultimately, there's nothing in your body that can hide from the cold. Your body involuntarily shakes, and then shakes it out, and your nervous system shakes things out. You start getting spins because ultimately of what the breath is doing to your body. But that's a powerful process, and that's my go-to when I'm in deep. What was it, last week or the week before? I was just really going through some really deep stuff, and I was just in breath work, just our beta breath, and I was doing it up, and I'm just purging, and I'm just in the hurt, and that big deep wound is coming up, and I just thought I've got to go down and get my sword and go and slay this dragon. And so I just brought myself up here and just jumped into the bath, turned it on, cold water naked, and just cold water rebirth. And it truly is it's the fuck you to whatever you've got in you, eh? It's the I'm coming for you.
Coming for
you. It's
nowhere to hide.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide there, and it's coming for you, and it's that's super powerful. So there's 3 factors on the rebirthing. So obviously the dry rebirth, lying down, hot water rebirth, and then ultimately the cold. And so we've got the tools there, brother.
Very much so. And that is it. Like, this is an offering. If you're listening to this and you feel called to it, you feel that there's a willingness to go deeper, you feel like there's something holding you back, but you don't know what it is. Maybe you've tried lots of different modalities or therapies or pharmaceutical drugs or even more natural alternatives, but there's still something hiding that you can't find within you. Yeah, rebirthing will help you find it.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Beautiful, brother.
Well, brother.
Well, it's been a beautiful journey.
Yeah.
Together with the breath. Ultimately, it's the thing that's brought us together. And it's been a beautiful journey, man.
And we're a powerful force out there in the world, brother. Just because doing so much of this work, just being able to show up and just such authenticity and openness and truth, and unashamedly, unashamedly doing it, And so, thank you, brother. And
too, brother.
And here's to bringing this to the world.
Oof. Aho.
Aho. All right, people, thank you for listening, and we love you all, and see you next week.
See you next week, everybody. Much love.